For our lesson today, we want to look at the impact that Charles Lindbergh had with his flight, that nonstop flight from New York to Paris. And we want to kind of see how it affected society and what happened. And so we'll get started by looking at Charles Lindbergh. And you see Charles Lindbergh right here, and he actually has some Minnesota connections. So he grew up in a little town called Little Falls, Minnesota, was not a great student, but was a very, very interested person. And so he had some experience with planes, and you see him sitting next to the one called the Spirit of St. Louis right here. And we'll see kind of how that plane became famous and how it actually got its name also. So, what you started to see with Charles Lindbergh is we had this guy right here, a guy by the name of Raymond Ortigue. Now, he was wealthy, and he said, I'm going to pay anyone 25 grand if they can fly nonstop from New York to Paris. Now, 25 grand at that time is a lot of money. And so when you're talking about this, a lot of people said, hey, I think I can do this. Like, I'll give it a shot. And so you'd have people that tried all the time. So if you caught this in 1919, he offered this. In 1927, so it's taking a lot of years, people started really trying because they were saying, okay, if we can fly nonstop New York to Paris, we could open up the world. So this is a way for people to get instantly famous. And so what you saw is this guy right here, Richard Byrd. He takes off, plane crashes, escapes with only a broken wrist. Now that same April, two other pilots set off from Virginia. They crash, they die. And so early May, two French pilots, they leave Paris, head out over the Atlantic, they disappear. So this is something that has never been done, which in our world we go, well, wait, people fly to Paris all the time from the United States. But this is the first time it's going to be done. And so this is not something that's going to be easy. And so people were kind of paying attention to it, saying, okay, who's going to win this? So people were getting planes ready, they were getting their crews ready, they were getting their people ready. We were seeing who's going to be the one that's going to be the most successful. Now, most people thought it was going to be Byrd. He had three engines in his plane, huge plane. He had a crew that was helping him. People thought this is the guy that's going to be able to do it. Now, another plane, one of them, one of the three, was this one called the Spirit of St. Louis. Now, this is going to be the one that it actually is able to complete this haul. Now, the Spirit of St. Louis, this is a picture, if you've ever been to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, you can see the Spirit of St. Louis. It's hanging from the actual ceiling there. But it got its name because it got its group of businessmen. They were the one who put their money together to try to fund this and try to get Lindbergh up there. Now, Lindbergh, I told you, he had a huge past. So this is him actually flying. He was a daredevil, a trick pilot. So he would go out on the wing and hang off of it, and people would pay. He would go to fairs and offer people rides for $5, get up in a plane for your first time ever, which remember, $5 during this time period was a lot of money. So he had a ton of flying experience. Now, most people didn't fly at this time. They took trains. Trains were by far the easiest mode of transportation at that time. And so people were like, do I want to go up in something that I don't know if it's going to be able to land, or if it does land, it might be a crash landing? So people didn't know exactly how to take this. Now, Lindbergh, one of the things that helped him the most was his experience flying for the U.S. mail. So he would go from St. Louis to Chicago quite a bit, delivering mail. So he would get all the mail, deliver it, then the post office would take it and hand it out to the people. Now, what you started to see then is you started to see people try. And if you notice this one, you have the pilot of one of the attempts right here who had to eject. And so this was not something that was going to be easy. So here comes Charles Lindbergh, 6'2", skinny, looks young. He's 25 years old in this picture, but he looks a lot younger than that. And people didn't take him too seriously. Now, for us in Minnesota, because we had those roots, his father was a congressman in Minnesota too, because he had that connection to Little Falls, we said, okay, we're going to back this guy. So, like I said before, he wasn't a good student. He got kind of transferred because of his dad's job to a bunch of different schools. Didn't love to read. Um, I shouldn't say didn't love to read. Didn't love to go to school, but he did like to learn. And so one of the things that really interested him was flight. And so 8 a.m. on May 20th, he takes off. Now, the weather is terrible that day, but he wanted to get up and in the air before other people could. And because of his past with the US mail, he was used to flying in bad weather. And so his little plane had this in it. Okay? Because it was not a huge plane, he had to watch his weight. And so he had to figure out exactly how much gasoline you're going to need, but you have to remember, no one's done this before, so these are all estimates. So you have to hope that your math is going to be good here. And so he had a little wicker chair in there. He had a little bit of fuel. He had water, a paper sack full of sandwiches, and a rubber raft, which I'm not sure why he put the rubber raft in there, because if you crashed over the ocean, you were probably going to die anyway. Okay, so that's what he had in there. So no parachute, none at all. So he's going to try to go over this ocean that nobody has ever done before and not even have a parachute. The other thing he didn't have is a radio. So no forms of communication. And so Lindbergh gets out and he heads out to sea, and people start kind of following on the radio, like, hey, Charles Lindbergh is attempting this. Now, keep in mind, many plane crashes have happened. People have disappeared in the ocean, never to be heard from again, and he's taking off. So the world's starting to pay attention. Now, radios were huge in the 20s. So people would sit around their radio and listen to his progress. Now, there was a huge boxing match at Yankee Stadium. Everybody stood up, said a prayer, assuming that Lindbergh may not make it, but hoping that he did. Now, what started to happen then is Lindbergh, because he's a solo pilot, he starts to get tired. 8 to 10 hours of flying. Now, he didn't sleep much the night before because he was so excited about this, but he's in a plane by himself. So luckily, as the plane would go up and down, it would keep waking him up. So as he started to fall asleep, he would start to spiral down. That movement would wake him up, and he'd get back, and he'd start flying again. Now, he starts going, and this is the cockpit of his plane right here. So can you imagine going overseas in just this plane right here? Now, according to his calculations, he gets and starts to see land. It was Ireland. He's getting close. His charts are right. His math was right. His GPS planning was correct. Now, he didn't know that his plane had been spotted over Ireland, so the people that were listening on the radios and on the news, they started to hear that, holy cow, we have a plane and it's spotted over land. And so now Lindbergh's flying and he goes over London, he goes over the English Channel, he can see, he knows he's on the right path, and 33 and a half hours later, he sees the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Now, he doesn't know what to expect though. He doesn't even know if the world's paying any attention to him at this time. Plus, it had taken way less time than he expected, so he thought that he was going to go to an empty airport, land, and go, I just flew from New York to Paris. But all of a sudden, he sees this huge mob of people. Now, he lands the plane. This is him right here. He lands the plane, and all of these people are there to rush to him to see and kind of celebrate him. So he's exhausted. 33 and a half hours, no sleep, had this flight that nobody has ever done. He just wants to kind of celebrate, but watch what happens to him. The news gets a hold of it, says he does it, 33 and a half hours, awesome. Now, kings, princes of countries, they're coming saying, you're a hero. Now remember, that was the goal, right? Yes, you're going to get the prize money, but you're going to become famous too. Now, he wanted to actually stay in Europe and see some of the sights, but our president at the time, Calvin Coolidge, said, nope, you are such a hero. We've got to get you back. So they sent a naval cruiser back to Europe, loaded up the Spirit of St. Louis, and brought him back as a world hero, where you're going to see celebrations for him. So if you see up here, this is one of the celebrations for him. You see Lindy, that was his name, Lucky Lindy. You also had people call him the Lone Eagle because he was able to make that flight by himself. But this was a major, major, major accomplishment in our history because it now has opened up the world. You no longer had to sit in the United States. We can now go anywhere in the world. And so, did he collect his prize check? Absolutely. He was able to get that check. And so, Charles Lindbergh had one of the most amazing accomplishments in the history of the United States from that nonstop flight from New York to Paris.